Welcome to Caribbean Business Review, where insight meets impact. We bring you economic and financial updates, sharp statistical breakdowns, and data-driven insights on the forces shaping the region. Smart analysis, bold ideas, real Caribbean intelligence. This is CBR. Welcome to episode 8 of season 2 of the Caribbean Business Review. I'm Joseph Cox. First, thank you for your continued support across all our social media channels and MKR Radio. Our special guest this week is Peisha Bryan-Lee, Program Director of Vision 2030 Jamaica, the country's long-term development plan. Now, this conversation was recorded just prior to Hurricane Melissa's devastating passage across Jamaica. And while our hearts are with those affected, we believe the themes discussed remain deeply relevant to the country's long-term development vision. In that regard, we'll be discussing how Jamaica navigates that strategy and whether, in its current form, it represents ambition or illusion. In the CBR briefing, we explore Jamaica's recovery in the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa, a clear-eyed analysis of where the country stands along the reconstruction continuum, its fiscal buffers, and the way forward. But before we get there, a few important issues deserve attention. Now, in the wake of Hurricane Melissa, Jamaica's recovery is not just about rebuilding homes, it's about restoring confidence. Confidence in how aid is managed, how quickly relief reaches communities, and how responsibly both public and private actors account for every dollar donated. Already there are reports of fake websites and social media pages pretending to collect relief funds. It's a reminder that transparency isn't a luxury, it's a safeguard. All official donation channels should be clearly listed by the government and accredited NGOs, and every donor, whether corporate or individual, should receive an acknowledgement or receipt for tax and audit purposes. The same discipline must extend to how aid is recorded and reported. A public registry of contributions and disbursements help build trust both at home and abroad. Now, these are small administrative steps, but trust me, they make a big difference. They ensure accountability, protect donors, and prevent well-intentioned generosity from being exploited. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department's decision to raise Jamaica's travel advisory to level 3, meaning reconsider travel, the day after the storm, is of course within its sovereign right. Still, the timing is extremely unfortunate. The message it sends, even unintentionally, can have real economic consequences for tourism-dependent communities already facing enormous loss. What Jamaica needs most right now is partnership, not panic. International visitors and investors should know that the island remains safe, organized, and transparent in its recovery process. We'll be watching these developments closely, but for now, let's turn to the stories that we are tracking this hour in our Market Watch and Global Pulse segments. Coming up in the Market Watch, Jamaica receives record parametric insurance payouts following Hurricane Melissa. Barbados grows by 2.7%, and Bermuda's job growth stalls. Then in Global Pulse, UK energy regulators unveil a £500 million energy debt relief plan. US and China suspend $3.2 billion in ship fees, and the European Central Bank holds rates as inflation hits 2.2%. All that and more this hour on Market Watch and Global Pulse. Coming up next is the CBR Briefing. This is a CBR Briefing. I'm Joseph Cox. When Hurricane Melissa tore across Jamaica, it wasn't just a storm, it was a stress test of resilience. With sustained winds of 185 miles per hour and rainfall topping 30 inches, Melissa left destruction unseen since Gilbert. Early models estimate losses of up to $14 billion, nearly 70% of GDP. Melissa halted tourism overnight, closed airports and cruise ports, and inundated farmlands across the south and west. Manufacturers suspended operations as utilities went offline, a disruption far beyond Hurricane Ivan in 2004. But this time, Jamaica had prepared. Under the National Natural Disaster Risk Financing Policy, the country maintains 130.6 billion Jamaican dollars, about 815 million US dollars in layered coverage. It starts with a 5.8 billion Jamaican dollars in local funds and then 6.5 billion in World Bank catastrophe deferred drawdown option, followed by parametric insurance through CCRIF, and at the top, the World Bank catastrophe bond issued in 2024. The system is now delivering. Jamaica will receive 150 million US from the CAT bond and 70.8 million from CRIF, the largest payout in its history, with a possible rainfall policy payment to come. This has been characterized as a shock absorber for the economy, providing funds within days, not months. Yet resilience at the macro level can't hide the reality that only 5% of Jamaicans hold property insurance. Most households and small firms will rebuild from savings or loans, highlighting the region's protection gap. As of October 31, about 490,000 customers remain without electricity, with 70% of transmission lines still down. The government targets 90% restoration in Kingston, St. Andrew, and St. Thomas by November 2. Telecoms are also recovering. 500 flow sites offline, 7 destroyed, though Starlink emergency links now serve 67,000 customers. Behind every statistic, though, lies a human story. Families in shelters, children out of school, shop owners starting over. Recovery is about rebuilding lives as much as infrastructure. By week's end, Norman Manley, Sangsters, and Ian Fleming airports are open, and the Port of Kingston is operating and waiving storage fees until November 2. The Jamaica Customs Agency has waived import duties and GCT for 30 days under the Disaster Risk Management Act, expediting relief and construction supplies. Cruise ports in Ocho and Port Royal reopened on October 31, while Falmouth remains under repair. The Consumer Affairs Commission has imposed a price freeze on essentials, warning that price gouging can attract fines of up to 1 million Jamaican dollars. Jamaica's recovery will be measured not only by how much it rebuilds, but by how smartly it does so. Vision 2030 calls for an economy resilient to shocks, where preparedness and partnership replace panic. Hurricane Melissa is both tragedy and turning point, proof that preparedness pays and that resilience must be as human as it is fiscal. This has been your CBR Briefing. I'm Joseph Cox. This is a 90-second market brief. Jamaica is set to receive a record $150 million payout from its World Bank catastrophe bond and another $70.8 million from CRIF SPC following the devastation of Hurricane Melissa, marking the largest disaster financing response in the country's history. The government has also granted 30 days of customs and GCT relief to speed up recovery imports. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department has raised Jamaica's travel advisory to level 3 to reconsider travel, citing heightened crime, health, and disaster risks following the storm, even as airports and ports reopen. Elsewhere in the region, Grenada projects 4.4% growth in 2025, while St. Kitts and Nevis expects medium-term growth of 2.5%. Barbados expanded 2.7% in the first 9 months of 2025, supported by record tourism arrivals, low inflation, and strong reserves, while the Cayman Islands grew 3.1%, driven by financial services and construction. Trinidad and Tobago is targeting $9 billion in new investments over 5 years, including a $50 million rum distillery expected to employ 2,000 nationals. In the Bahamas, fiscal strains have emerged after a $61 million sinking fund withdrawal, while Moody's and Fitch downgraded growth forecast to 1.8% for 2025. Now, this has been your 90-second market brief on Caribbean Business Review. I'm Joseph Cox. For more, look for us on YouTube and Spotify.
World of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox and Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox and Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
Still ahead on Caribbean Business Review, our conversation with Peisha Bryan-Lee, Program Director, Vision 2030 Jamaica, and whether that long-term development plan represents ambition or illusion.
And if we can see where we're learning lessons, documenting them, using them to improve so that incrementally year by year, we get stronger in terms of those fundamentals of development, then we not only can celebrate the achievements we've made, but we can celebrate that we are building a sustainable infrastructure for development that will help us as we go forward to build and to be able to utilize the resources we have in such a way that we can get the most out of it. So those are some of the success factors we're looking at.
Okay, welcome back to Caribbean Business Review. I'm Joseph Cox, and today our special guest is Peisha Bryan-Lee, who is the Program Director for Vision 2030 Jamaica. Now, Vision 2030 is Jamaica's long-term development planning, or planning framework, if you will, covering a period of 2009 or 2009 through to 2030. Now, Peisha, good day to you. Thank you. Welcome to the program. Because I know that Vision 2030 has been a lightning rod in some markets for commendations, for criticism, for you know what. In this dynamic, you have all views must contend, and all views, I suspect, will continue to contend. But the question I really want to ask you as we start our conversation today is, when Vision 2030 was launched, we never had AI. We didn't have, the climate shocks were there, but they weren't as pronounced and public as they are now. And we didn't have the kind of global debt distress that we are all faced with. Now, the question coming out of that sort of frame is, does Vision 2030 Jamaica, does it require a redesign, or is it just a matter of updating?
Well, thank you for having me, Mr. Cox. And I think that's an excellent question. Very good question to start. So I would say no. Vision 2030 does not need to be redesigned or even updated. And I will explain why. So Vision 2030, the design of Vision 2030 Jamaica is for agility, adaptation, and continuous improvement. So the long-term national development plan has broad strategies, national strategies that basically speak to the broad sectoral areas that we'll be developing and the ultimate impact that we want to speak. So when you look at a national strategy, you get a sense of where we're going and the area we're giving focus to. Vision 2030 is also policy driven. So everything is based on policy. And it is implemented through the medium-term socio-economic policy framework. So 7 are planned from 2009 to 2030. Each covers 3 fiscal years. And what the MTF does is it speaks to the current reality. And there are sector strategies that are aligned to the national strategies. And what these sector strategies present, it's the current policy focus and approach that within that broad national strategy that we're going to take in that medium-term period to advance the long-term goals. And
when you say MTF, but when you say MTF, I presume you're speaking medium-term framework, right?
Medium-term socio-economic policy framework. My apologies for that. And what we do in the MTF is that we're able to look at, when we prepare an MTF, it's evidence-based and it's also results-based. We look at the environment, we meet with our stakeholders, and we look at what is necessary to move the country forward. But we also look at our capacity. Because we also have to be realistic. We look at capacity and capacity building needs, as well as what do we need to do to move the country forward. So artificial intelligence is a part of the current medium-term socioeconomic policy framework that goes from 2024 to 2027, in that it's a consideration there. Just like how we were able to include the considerations for the blue and green economy. We have been able to integrate a lot into the framework based on the design of Vision. Vision 2030 Jamaica was designed with an understanding that things change and that the framework should be able to adapt to change and represent those changes.
Okay, I hear you on that, but I mean, aside from having a crystal ball, I'm not sure you'd have anticipated, frankly speaking, the AI and the AI revolution that has come to the fore.
Excellent
But
point. But I can respond to that.
sure.
National Outcome 11, a technology-enabled society. And under internationally competitive industry structure, that's Outcome 12, we have ICT, Information and Communication Technology, as focal areas. So under both of these areas, we are able, as I said, remember I mentioned those national strategies that are in the 3-year MTF that are policy-driven. We are able to integrate strategies and programs under those two national outcomes that respond to current technological innovation, but also speak to how the country should respond, and speak to what are the objectives of the country in relation to interacting with technology, whether it should we be developing technology, adapting technology to local needs, equipping the society to be able to effectively interact with technology. That is there. So in 2009 and 2007, we started planning, we would have known that AI, although some AI was around at that time, but we would not have been able to say, as you said, that crystal ball. But we were able to say that technology was going to be an important part of our future. So you have an outcome that speaks to technology, or two outcomes that speak to technology, and you create these broad strategies that say in terms of where we want to be. So if we want a technology-enabled society, wherever the technology goes, we have to adapt.
No, I hear you on that. And that leads me to the probably most obvious question of all. We are in 2025. It's Vision 2030. From your standpoint, at the Vision 2030 Jamaica Secretariat, if you will, what does success look like? What is it that you're looking for? Is it a degree of transformation within the economy, or is there some metrics that you're looking at? Or what is it? What does success look like?
Okay, so there are several dimensions to success. While we use metrics to measure performance, success is not the metrics. That's just a tool. Success is, as you mentioned, transformation, but success is also how Jamaican people feel about the development process. So when we started, the intention was to, and I should backtrack to say one thing, Vision 2030 Jamaica is a country's first long-term national development plan. When it was designed, it was understood that it would be followed by other long-term national development plans. And the intention was at the time to see how far we could take the country towards developed country status. So one of the metrics, of course, is how far have we moved the country towards that. But another metric is how much have we developed in terms of transforming institutions, governance structures, so that our development is sustainable. How much have we seen improvements in the quality of life of Jamaicans? And not just in terms of, and when I say not just in terms of the metrics, but how Jamaicans ourselves, how we feel about the quality of life. And that for us is important. And also the extent to which we have learned lessons. Because one of the things when you think of long-term national development planning, you think of learning and adaptation. to what extent have we been able to learn lessons from this process so that we can strengthen our approach, become more efficient and effective? And to what extent are we using these lessons to improve? And if we can see where we're learning lessons, documenting them, using them to improve so that incrementally year by year, we get stronger in terms of those fundamentals of development, then we not only can celebrate the achievements we've made, but we can celebrate that we are building a sustainable infrastructure for development that will help us as we go forward to build and to be able to utilize the resources we have in such a way that we can get the most out of it. So those are some of the success factors we're looking at.
All right. Well, answer your one question then. Based implicit in what you have just said, has it been a success thus far?
In some areas, yes, and in some areas, no. So, for example, we have been able to achieve macroeconomic stability. But within the context of achieving macroeconomic stability, what we've also been able to do is to develop policy frameworks, strengthen governance and institutional arrangements so that we can maintain that macroeconomic stability. And we've seen that this works because during COVID, we were able to maintain our macroeconomic stability. And it was that macroeconomic stability that helped us to rebound the way we did. So we have seen that investing in policy, investing in building strong institutions, strong governance frameworks, accountability mechanisms, etc., help us to be more resilient and to be able to maintain gains. So that is a success that we are hoping to translate to other areas. There are other areas, however, that we've seen challenges. And by this I say the pace of transformation in several areas. When we started Vision 2030 Jamaica, we did have a high debt burden. And at the same time, we had the 2008 global financial crisis to contend with the effects of that. And when you think about that, but that is what forced us to actually be more focused on macroeconomic stability. But it also meant that we didn't have enough to do certain kinds of investment that we wanted to do. And so we had to prioritize, we had to make some trade-offs, which we didn't necessarily want to, but we had to. And we've seen the benefits, but we've also seen where that has meant that some areas that needed transformation moved a little bit more slowly. Because we were also in a transformation phase as it relates to the economy, it would have had some impact in terms of how we feel about development as a people. And that in and of itself would have impacted, say, participation in some areas. For example, whenever you're going through an economic crisis, education is impacted because it's social participatory. And it's not just about your ability to participate in education, because there is access to education to the secondary level in terms of free access mostly. Government has put those policies in place. But it's also your confidence in participating in the education system. What are going to be the personal outcomes for me? And so when we're going through those kinds of the global financial crisis and persons were having, were feeling the effects of that would have impacted persons' participation in certain key areas of the economy that would have driven growth, because the education is what we need in our society. Education is one of the key areas. But at the same, yes.
No, I'm hearing you on that, but you see, and whereas I would agree with you that the data does point to macroeconomic stability for Jamaica, the honest truth of it is that nonetheless, the growth in Jamaica it's not just the medium term, over the long term has been very anemic. And therefore, I mean, I'm taking a point in terms of some of the transformative mechanisms that have been put in place. But nonetheless, is it that a Vision 2030, even though you have 5 years to go, and perhaps there's a successor program to come, I don't know, but is it that you need to make some radical changes now to spur or to create that additional impetus, policy impetus, if you will, that will really push the country over to the next level of real transformative growth?
And that too is an excellent point. Now, I think, current policy and current focus of government is exactly where you're saying. But, today when I was thinking about Hurricane Melissa, And us having this conversation, one of the things I started thinking about, it's this balancing act that we've been having to do over the decades. And since we started Vision 2030 Jamaica, we said, okay, let's get more focus on growth being one of the key areas that we've been having to do the balancing act of managing crises, whether it's a pandemic, a global economic crisis, the vulnerabilities, these climate-related vulnerabilities that we have, then, and all of these crises we have to balance with the fact that we had a debt burden that has gone down significantly, but would have impacted public investment. We now have more space for public investment, but at the same time, the population requires that certain fundamental public goods and services and access to opportunities for asset creation are there, while at the same time, we need to invest in industries that will spur growth. And we have to have that balancing act. So I was thinking about that today when I came in to say, what if a Hurricane Melissa impacts us? We have been working on and promoting housing, those kinds of things. And that is part of promoting some sense of security within the human capital so that they're more motivated to be a part of the productive sector. We have been working on managing, as you said, as we discussed, macroeconomic stability. But if a Melissa hits us, and then we have to go back, we have to invest in crisis response, then how do we manage that? And that, for me, is one of the things that we need to come up with. We have been working to respond to it, but how do we respond, I think, is one of those things. Because fine, we are at record low unemployment in Jamaica. We have been for a few years.
Yeah.
We have been promoting industries, but we've been saying we need to move from those industries that are on lower levels of the value chain, the global value chain, to those that are on the higher levels of the global value chain, which are more technology and otherwise oriented. And we need to invest in the infrastructure. So I'm thinking about all the moves we've been making in terms of making agriculture more climate smart, having more AI, for example, in agriculture. What if a Melissa hits us? And we have to make those choices in terms of where we put the resources. And I think that's one of our major challenges. We have to, and persons like yourself are there to help us in terms of how do we do this balance so that we still have the investments to promote that growth that we need, while at the same time being able to manage, and we have to invest in the environment. And we have been very active in terms of promoting climate justice, doing legislation for environmental resilience. But while we're doing that, we still have to be managing the ongoing effect of our vulnerabilities. And so I think that has been, and I guess since this morning I've been thinking about it because of this conversation that I know I was going to come to have with the great Joseph Cox.
I hear you. No, but the real crux of it, I suspect, is that while you are going through a process of transformation, of course, any plan will have hiccups along the way. I don't know, because there is no way with the best will in the world, and worse, yours is a long-term development plan. There are so many imponderables that come to bear. Because frankly speaking, with the whole changing trade dynamic now, nobody could ever have anticipated anything like this in the wildest dreams. So, that's just par for the course. But the other aspect of it that I'm curious about, because I'm also aware that, because of course, in anticipation of our conversation, I did a little bit of research. And I'm also conscious of the fact that other countries have been looking to the Vision 2030, call it model, if you will, as perhaps a guide to adopt in their own countries. And I'm wondering, how does that outreach work? And of course, I suppose the broader question really is, in imparting that knowledge, in guiding those processes, in all countries, all territories, you have political change, eh? You have changes in administration from one to the next. Sometimes not even the administration itself that changes, but sometimes the personnel that are involved in ministries. And with that comes new thinking, new all sorts of new ideas and concepts. How does one keep focus while you're trying to impart that message? And of course, looking across the region, we have the how should I say, the structures of the economies are in some cases vastly different. How do you How do you guide people through that process? Plus inform yourselves.
Well, Vision 2030 Jamaica is considered a global best practice.
Okay.
Maybe also because we were one of the first countries to decide to take on the mammoth task of saying we're gonna pursue long-term national development planning. Despite, I would say, political risk. I don't mean partisan politics. I mean the political risk in terms of the decision making and how the public responds to when you don't meet targets because you were planning way ahead of time and uncertainties arise. One of the things though about the model, it's the fact, I remember I mentioned the continuous improvement, but also that it's policy driven. So Vision 2030 Jamaica is designed for changes in political and policy direction. So it was anticipated that there will be changes in government. So when we were developing Vision 2030 Jamaica, there was bipartisan consultation between the two. We consulted with the two major political parties. And there was consensus among the two parties in terms of those long-term strategies and goals that we were working towards. The medium-term socio-economic policy framework comes into force through cabinet approval. So it is the sitting government that signs off on the policy priorities in the MTF. And so whoever is in the seat of government has the opportunity to shape those medium-term strategies and to sign off on them. And that is how we have ensured that there is continuous political engagement and political buy-in, because we're not telling one party doesn't feel like they have to carry forward the policy direction. And even within an MTF cycle, because it is policy driven, it is strategy driven, and it is results based, the model says that you can put up, because we do have indicative programs in the MTF, but the model says, say a COVID-19 comes and you can't implement a program, what you need to focus on is staying true to the development results that you've planned for and the strategies that you have committed to. But also, please be advised, we do not take it as a static model. So we started a strategic review in 2019. And what that strategic review has allowed us to do is assess the relevance of the strategies. But also, along the way, in the respective MTFs, we have included a few strategies. We have made some tweaks. For example, in 2014, Jamaica adopted the social protection strategy. When we started Vision 2030 Jamaica, social protection and poverty reduction were treated synonymously globally. By 2014, when we had our groundbreaking strategy, we separated the two in a way. Poverty is still important, but the social protection strategy of Jamaica gives a life course approach to social protection and says that all of us should be socially protected because any of us can fall on hard times. You could be the happiest, youngest person out there thinking that life is grand, and you walk out there and something happens to you. So you weren't vulnerable before, but you now become vulnerable. And so that is what the approach is now, that there are different types of vulnerabilities, and we need to take an approach that says we're protecting everybody throughout the life course. So we had to then adopt a strategy that spoke to this broader approach that we were using. We were adopting to social protection. And so we included a national strategy that was like an overarching strategy now that relates to social protection. And even though, and kind of in a way allows us to bring the others into that framework. So I just want to say the framework is not static. We do assess it, particularly when we're developing an MTF, but we also started our strategic review and we have learned a lot from that process, which we do share. But I'm glad you said what we learned from others, because we have learned a lot from stakeholders in terms of our partner countries, whether it's South-South cooperation, etc., just to learn from other countries what they do, because while we're sharing and they're sharing, they get something from us, we get something from them, because as Jamaicans, we know that every mickle make a muckle. You put everything in the pot and you stir it up, and that's what we do.
No, I'm hearing that the passion in your voice when you're referencing that, but I'm also very mindful of the fact that, for example, in terms of the social protection mechanisms that are put on the table, one, you have considerable leakage. meaning you have people who, try and abuse the system. And that is age-old. That's not a Vision 2030 challenge. That has been a challenge for many, many, many decades. And I don't know that this is going to change anytime soon. But the other side of it now is in terms of we have new policies that coming on stream now. So, for example, you have unemployment insurance, which is finally being mooted in Jamaica after being put on the table squarely from 2008. Right? It's finally coming to some sort of fruition in 2025. But again, I keep wondering, first of all, the time lag in our implementation frame. Because we're good at developing policies, Peisha, you'll appreciate that. But on the implementation side, we give new meaning to the word implementation lag, right? Because I hear me saying a 17-year lag between when unemployment insurance was mooted and when it's finally being acted upon. One. Two, when you're looking at that, one of the things that keeps fascinating me is that we don't seem to pay a lot of attention, for example, when we're looking at these things, to really transforming the labor market, reducing the effective labor market rigidities. So you see the unemployment insurance is one aspect of it. But then to take you regionally just for a second, I look at what is happening in the Bahamas, where there is active resistance to the redundancy legislation that is being put on and the protections that are being put on the table. So in other words, this is not a monolith. Right? So how do you dance between those raindrops?
Okay, so going to the matter of the implementation lags, that's an excellent point because it's actually one of the main binding constraints we have identified. And it has also, and not just the team at the PIOG in terms of Vision 2030 Jamaica,
Right.
but by the public sector itself, private sector, etc. So the public sector and we have recognized that we implement a lot because I sometimes have persons say to me, we're not implementing. And I said, no, the data says we implement a lot, but that lagging implementation impacts the transformational effects of implementation. Because say you're implementing a transformational program and you need to have it done in 2 years and then you take 6 years. By the time you complete it, the world has changed and it is no longer transformative.
Precisely.
And so those are some of the challenges, which is why we've been looking at what are the impediments to that. And a lot of that has to do with institutional gaps in terms of the strength of our institutions or institutional arrangements. And I don't mean just structures, like a body or an organization. I mean our processes or procedures. And this whole idea of informality that came up, because it's so much a part of our culture, it is like we have that tension between procedure and I like the flexibility. I like the fact that I can hustle and go around the rules. And that tension is oftentimes one of the factors that impact institutional strength. We also have had challenges in terms of, because of those weaknesses in institutionalization, not documenting enough. And when you don't document your processes, which is part of the strength, and we've been having, as you know, high levels of labor migration. So what happens is institutional memory leaves. And that institutional memory impacts our capacity to be efficient. So we have, and there are other areas I won't go in for the interest of time, but we have recognized that particular issue is a challenge as it relates to being able to deliver. So when you speak and when you spoke about in terms of even improving the labor market, and I'm happy you went there because that is also something that we know is important. It is important because human capital development and mobilizing our human capital is critical for Jamaica's development.
Yeah. But then, Peisha, because you say two things that jumped out at me in terms of what you just said. One, you said there are high levels of labor migration. I would agree with you. But the statin census doesn't suggest that. I don't know what's going on here, but perhaps we need to look at that data set in a little bit more detail. But the other aspect of it, and your sociologist background, I'm surprised that you haven't raised perhaps the most obvious impediment that we have in terms of implementation right across this region. And that is introducing formally and structurally behavioral management in terms of policy implementation, because a lot of things, with the best will in the world, you can come up with your policy and it sounds good, it looks wonderful. But when you try to implement it at the local level, you have all sorts of nuances that have to be brought to bear. And sometimes not because people are malicious or, anti whatever. The fact of life is that given their reality, if you will, right? Given the factors that confront them, they are unable to really accede to the kind of policy dynamic that you are envisioning. How you treat with that?
All right. So I want to go back just a little bit to that labor issue. I have not interrogated the census data. So I'm not speaking from a position now of I've interrogated the data, but I will say this much.
They've worried about that.
Currently, our demographic profile says that the largest proportion of the population is in the working age. So we do have proportionally a large labor force, not large in terms of globally, but in terms of when you think about the country, the majority of the people are in the working age. Let me take out the word labor force and working age. Now, when it comes to migration, some of us migrate, some of us stay. So we still have a large proportion of people in that working age. One of the challenges we've had though, and when it comes to the labor force, some of it is not labor migration. Some of it is aligning or training with labor market needs, and also having certain fundamentals in terms of our education system so that we have the foundation to be able to acquire certain skills. In this global era, those who survive, and the global data is speaking to that, are oftentimes persons who come into the workplace with skills that allow them to learn other skills. So that skill of learning and analysis is important. So I can understand why we have a skill shortage in critical areas. We have labor mobility of some of the most highly skilled people because they're demanded. But we still have a lot of people who are skilled and are maybe not certified but have some skills, because we Jamaicans tend to have skill even if we're not certified. So then they still have a large pool of people who can offer labor services. But when you think about the productivity of the labor, the ability to meet those specialist needs, that is a different conversation. So I'll go to the other element that
No, you're not going to skip past this now, because there is also a factor that you need to bring to the table, and this is a whole matter of information asymmetry. It is amazing that continuously the private sector argues that there are serious capacity constraints in terms of qualified persons to fill, for example, middle management positions in their establishments, in their organizations. But at the same time, you have a large swath of your tertiary graduates who are unable to find employment and indeed look to the developed markets for their opportunities. So there clearly is the issue of information asymmetry. And again, within your Vision 2030, within that whole framework, are you tweaking? How do you plan to address that sort of obvious challenge?
There are strategies in Vision 2030 Jamaica that speak to aligning, for example, education and training with labor market needs. There also have been over the years things about employment readiness. But I do think, and this is where Vision 2030 Jamaica is evidence-based, that we are looking into this to better understand the current labor dynamics and market demands, which are different from previous. And what I mean by this is, when you look at a lot of where the gaps are, is that some yes, I'm young, and remember I just said this thing about your ability to learn. So yes, I'm young, I come in the workplace, but because of all the different demands now in terms of the change in the technology, the change in demands in terms of being able to be productive, to be competitive globally, because If it is that I do not have the skills to be able to learn, to analyze, to use data, if I'm not information literate, digital literate, then what happens is, yes, I'm a graduate with a tertiary education degree. I could even have a master's, a PhD, but am I useful to that employer in middle management? So the information issue in terms of knowing that the jobs are there is one, or knowing that the skills are there by the employer is one. But there's another issue of employing persons who, and I'm not saying the word trainable, because you can train somebody and they still are not productive. It is your ability to deliver productively and to interact with the job space in that way. And I think that's what when we listen to the conversations from stakeholders, that is a lot of what we're hearing. But as I said, it's something that we think we need to look a little bit more into.
All right, we have exactly 1.5 minutes. Back to now the behavioral aspects of it, because this is part of the issue that I want to see you address.
All right, so change management is important. One of the things we've learned, and as a human being, we know this. We will say we want improvements in X, but when someone says to us to get that improvement, you need to change your behavior. We want the outcome, but we don't want to change our behavior because it probably makes us uncomfortable. And that is not just within organization, that's just in the broader society. And so change management is important. But what we've also found within, and we have tweaked our communication strategy within Vision 2030 Jamaica in terms of, and using a more communications. I mean, there's always a communications but development approach, but we've tweaked that approach so that we are not focused on information sharing as much, promotions, because it's not a product that we're selling. That's not what we're selling in development. What we are doing is engagement. We're talking about empowerment and enablement so that the citizenry can be a part of the development process. They can own it. And that's a part of the change management too, because if I own something, I understand it and I'm equipped to be a part of the development solution, then I'm more likely to participate. So we've been focusing on social contract building. We've been focusing on empowerment and not so much about selling a product. Because if I come to someone and say, here are the goals of Vision 2030 Jamaica, and they can't relate to it, I am selling, can you imagine I'm selling to my Jamaican people that this is what we want? How can I sell to you and then tell you this is what we want? So we have adapted the approach to one that better engages our people. And I'm not saying that the intention was not to engage from beginning, but we realized that there were gaps. We were using these approaches that were not working. And we have seen significant improvement in public engagement since we have changed the approach. So I just want to tell you, one of our major programs right now, which we launched on February 14, Valentine's Day this year, was Love Jamaica. And believe me, we've been seeing the love.
All right. Well, fair enough. I hear you on that, Peisha Bryan-Lee, as I thank you very much for your time today. As Peisha Bryan-Lee, who is the Program Director for Vision 2030 Jamaica, Jamaica's long-term development framework. So thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you as always, Mr. Cox.
All right, no problem.
In a world of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox & Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox & Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
Welcome to Market Watch. I'm Joseph Cox, bringing you the latest economic and financial updates across the Caribbean and beyond. Jamaica will receive a landmark $150 million from its World Bank-backed catastrophe bond after Melissa's 185 mile per hour winds caused losses estimated between $5 to $16 billion. The parametric trigger ensures rapid liquidity without assessments and complements the country's CRIF and contingency funds. Separately, CRIF SPC confirmed a $70.8 million payout to Jamaica, its largest ever, with an additional excess rainfall payment pending verification. Together, these mark Jamaica's fourth CRIF payouts, totaling over $100 million. Analysts at AM Best warn that only about 5% of properties are insured, leaving major losses uninsured and tourism, which represents 35% of GDP, under strain. The Bahamas has drawn down $61 million from its sinking funds to meet debt service, reversing earlier plans to rebuild reserves, even as cruise arrivals hit a record 9.5 million. Moody's and Fitch have trimmed the 2025 growth projections to 1.8%, citing slowing post-pandemic expansion. In the Cayman Islands, GDP rose 3.1% in 2024, driven by finance, construction, and tourism, while inflation eased to 2.6%. Barbados expanded 2.7% in the first 9 months of 2025, unemployment fell to 6.1%, and reserves reached $3.3 billion, covering 31 weeks of imports. And Grenada projects a 4.4% growth in 2025, led by reconstruction and large-scale investments such as Project Polaris. Across the region, cooperation continues to deepen. The Islamic Development Bank and the IDB Group pledged $1 billion over 5 years for infrastructure and climate-resilient development in Guyana and Suriname, while the new IDB OPEC fund facility will mobilize $400 million in projects across 24 countries. Meanwhile, the Bahamas has advanced financial sector reforms through the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Bill of 2025, strengthening oversight and audit powers to align with OECD common reporting standards. Now, turning to our markets, regional currencies were stable this week. The Jamaican dollar traded at 161.46 to the US dollar, and Trinidad and Tobago dollar at $6.77. All other currencies remained constant. Now, turning to our equities market, the Jamaica Stock Exchange Index closed at 322,820, down 0.32%. The All-TNT Index closed at 1385.48, down 0.34%. The Barbados BSC local index rose 0.04%, and Bermuda's BSX index climbed 3.9%. All other indices remain unchanged. Top gainers included First Rock Real Estate up 15.1% and Angostura Holdings up 5.1%. Decliners were A.S. Bryden and Sons down 14.9% and Pulse Investments down 9%. Now that's it for this edition of Market Watch. I'm Joseph Cox. Global Pulse is up next. This is CBR. Welcome to Global Pulse. I'm Joseph Cox. The IMF projects global growth at 3.2% in 2025, edging down from 3.3% last year, with output expected to average just 3.2% through the end of the decade, well below the pre-pandemic 3.7%. In Europe, the European Central Bank kept rates unchanged as Euro area GDP grew 0.2% in Q3, with inflation at 2.2% near target. Core inflation eased to 2.4%, while unemployment held at a record low 6.3%. Across North America, the Bank of Canada cut its policy rate to 2.25%, the second reduction this year amid U.S. tariff headwinds and a 1.6% GDP contraction in Q2. Meanwhile, Canada's GDP fell 0.3% in August, though preliminary data signals modest recovery in September. In the United States, a Congressional Budget Office estimates the federal government shutdown could shave up to 2% from Q4 GDP, costing some $7 to $14 billion depending on duration. Still, easing inflation pushed the average 30-year mortgage rate to 6.3%, a 13-month low ahead of a widely expected federal rate cut. Mexico's economy shrank 0.3% in Q3, its first year-on-year contraction since 2021, largely due to weaker manufacturing. Turning to Asia, the Bank of Japan held rates at 0.5%, but reiterated its readiness to tighten if inflation sustains. Japan's government says the economy continues a moderate recovery led by strong digital and capital investment, with a new $92 billion stimulus package in preparation. Trade tensions eased slightly as Washington and Beijing agreed to suspend $3.2 billion in reciprocal shipping fees for 12 months, a significant maritime de-escalation expected to reduce freight costs. And in tech, China has approved the transfer deal for TikTok's U.S. operations, clearing the way for American majority ownership by early 2026. ByteDance will retain under 20%, and the U.S. security partners will monitor the algorithm's operation under the agreement. And finally, global hedge funds assets hit a record $4.98 trillion in Q3, with inflows of $34 billion, the strongest since 2007. Turning to the commodities markets, oil price firmed as OPEC and U.S. inventories tightened. West Texas Intermediate crude rose to $60.98 per barrel, up 0.7%. Brent crude edged to $65.07, and the OPEC basket climbed nearly 1.9% to $66.46. Natural gas jumped 4.3% to $4.12 on renewed winter demand forecast. On global equity market, sentiment was mixed. In the U.S., Dow Jones added 40 points, the S&P 500 gained 0.26%, and the Nasdaq rose 0.6%. In Europe, the FTSE 100, DAX, and CAC 40 all slipped about 0.5% amid trade and growth uncertainty. Asian markets were divided. Japan's Nikkei 225 surged 2.1%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 1.4% as investors rotated out of Chinese equities. Now, that's our global pulse for this week. I'm Joseph Cox. This is the Caribbean Business Review. Well, that's a wrap on episode 8 of season 2 of the Caribbean Business Review. Now, thank you so much to our loyal audience on MKR Radio and indeed across all our digital platforms. We do appreciate your continued support as we live by our mantra that knowledge is strength, but information is power. A special thanks to our guest, Peisha Bryan-Lee, Program Director for Vision 2030 Jamaica, for her insights on Jamaica's long-term development vision. Now, some of the key takeaways. 1. Vision 2030 remains agile and globally respected, balancing macroeconomic stability with institutional and social transformation. 2. Human capital alignment, especially education to employment linkages, is critical to sustained inclusive growth. And 3. Behavioral change and civic engagement remain essential for turning policy frameworks into measurable progress. Remember, you can listen anytime on Spotify, and the latest edition of the Caribbean Financial Dispatch is live on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and linked in the YouTube comments. To subscribe, email us directly at caribbeanbusinessreview@gmail.com. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and follow Caribbean Business Review on TikTok, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, X, in the WhatsApp channels, and LinkedIn. Until next week, same time, same place, I'm Joseph Cox, and this has been CBR.